Welcome back, Officers of the Public. Sir Coruscant Underworld Police Chief APGAINS. Today we are talking about the hypothetical and not yet realized, but entirely probable fact that we are going to get a Galactic Legend Leia in the next couple of weeks, or at least the announcement for one, along with the requirements to get her. Now, I'm not necessarily in this video going to talk about, we're going to talk about whether or not you should farm her. I'm not going to necessarily talk about whether you should farm her with any specific pre-known wink wink requirements in mind, because that would be entirely speculative. I'm going to talk about should you farm her from a general roster perspective, right? And I'm going to lean this more in a free-to-play direction, but if you're spending money, feel free to just buy every character in the game, because that makes me very happy, because it makes me long for the days in which I will be successful enough to do the same thing. But what point should your roster be at to farm Galactic Legend Leia? Now, it's not necessarily Leia specifically that we're going to talk about. It's more the generalness of when you should attack as a free-to-play player, when you should attack very aggressively, upcoming meta-defining teams, right? That could be a new Galactic Legend, like when any of the previous Galactic Legends have come out. That could be a backbone team, like when Afra came out, or when Maul was out in Conquest or something like that. That could be a ship like Leviathan right now. A lot of players are farming the Leviathan for good reason. What point should you be at to make sure that you are going to successfully be able to chase this meta as a free-to-play player and not find yourself struggling for a long, long time in the depths of hell where you cannot come back and you are just drowning in your own sorrow? So generally speaking, you should farm the latest and greatest as a free-to-play player only if and only if you are already probably above 5 million galactic power. Like, if you are below 5 million galactic power, I do not believe that it is in your best interest to even consider attacking any real meta-defining changes at all. You're not going to be in a sturdy enough roster position to make it work, and it's going to be a while. Plus, if you're under that threshold, you probably already don't have a ton of characters that might randomly be prerequisites for that team, and you're just not going to necessarily be in the most fantastical of places, and that's totally fine. But let's say you're above 5 million GP. I would also like to say you should probably have at least 2 backbone teams, full core 8, at least 4 auxiliary teams, a Galactic Legend, and an S-tier ship. I think that's the bare minimum that you should have in order to consider chasing something of a Galactic Legend caliber character that's coming to the game, because it's going to have requirements that are going to be crazy. I mean, Leviathan has 2 R9s. I imagine Leia will likely also have 2 R9s. Now, there is a camp that is disputing that, because like Jabba was a step back from profundity because there wasn't really huge relic requirements, but Jabba kind of included an entire backbone character that a lot of people discounted, because a lot of players already had Jedi Knight Luke, but failed to realize that there is a vast majority of the player base that just isn't fortunate enough to have a backbone character just sitting in the wings that was a requirement for a Galactic Legend that shared a lot of requirements with other stuff. And that's kind of an oddball and a very rare occurrence in the CG sphere, so we're going to kind of discount all of that. So you're likely not going to have many of the requirements if you're slightly over 5 million GP, 2 backbone, full core 8, 4 auxiliary, 1 GL, 1 S tier ship. Like, you're probably not going to have a lot of overlapping requirements. And if you do, that's great. The new raid allows you to gear 12 characters relatively effectively. Geared 9 to gear 12 is pretty manageable nowadays as a free-to-play player, fortunately. The only problem is CG has definitely shifted their focus towards all of the bottleneck not being getting to relics, but rather what relics you actually are getting to. So if you're in the middle of a big farm right now, like let's say my account, almost 7 million galactic power, very, very well constructed. I'm approaching the final destination of acquiring Leviathan. It would not be a good idea for me to start farming a Galactic Legend Leia immediately after farming a Galactic Legend ship like the Leviathan. My resources would have been completely deleted. It would be such a slog to try and get those relics. And at that point, I would be chasing 2 metas back to back, and I would just be absolutely fucked. But why was I farming the Leviathan when the Leviathan was announced? Well, one, we knew roughly what the requirements were going to be. And if you're a free-to-play player, there is an absolutely stupendously massive advantage to having either the exact knowledge or, realistically speaking, having a general idea of what is going to be required for the character that you want to get. It is very frequently hard to know what kind of characters are going to be required for a Galactic Legend that isn't confirmed for teams that we don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many layers of separation and speculation that this makes this almost impossible to realistically do, which is why Leviathan was kind of a rare instance. And it's very frequently the ships where you kind of have a general better understanding of what's going to be required, as opposed to, you know, any of the Galactic Legends who have not yet been named. So you're probably not going to have a robust understanding of the Leia requirements. Now, Gerbil did do a fantastic video on kind of speculation on what the requirements were going to be based on characters that CG thinks that they can make good money off of, and I think that's probably a relatively okay place to start. I think he did a very good job on that video as well. But realistically speaking, since it's not even confirmed, and we're talking hypothetically about, you know, the next Galactic Legend and not necessarily the next Galactic Legend Leia, if you were just in a meta chase, like I'm doing the Leviathan right now, it would not be optimal for me to start doing another meta chase immediately afterwards. If you just unlocked a Galactic Legend or an S tier ship or something of that sort, it would likely not be a fantastic idea for you to immediately meta chase again. Assuming that you're a free-to-play player, it would not be a good idea for you to immediately meta chase again, because your resources are going to be depleted. It would be much, infinitely better to go back, pick up a couple extra auxiliary teams that you don't have, pick up a couple extra core teams if you don't have all core 8 teams, refine a backbone team that maybe you could have but haven't really put too much work into. Like, do you have a Maul team that has a bunch of Gear 11 characters on it? Like, maybe you put a little bit of work into making that a viable offensive-defensive switch team. Maybe you put some work into one of your teams that is already strong but is lacking a piece that could, and don't kill me for saying this word, but you get like one extra character from Relic 4 to Relic 5 so you can use a Datacron. You know what I mean? There are better things that you could be doing than immediately going after a meta chase after having immediately completed a meta chase. It's just way too depleting on your account, and you're not going to have any growth. You're going to remain stagnant for way too long. And yes, it is totally nice and sick when you finally unlock that character, you know, 9 months later. But at that point, there's going to be so many new backbone teams and all this other bullshit that's going to make it so much harder for you to have been effective, because you have put so much of your resources into one thing that you just weren't in a good position to farm. And that's fine. I mean, there are Galactic Legends that are going to get entirely skipped. I skipped Rey and SLKR in favor of going after JML because my roster just wasn't at the right place to attack SLKR and Rey when they came out. But my roster was in a very good place to attack JML when he and C came out, right? I was in a really good place to attack JMK when he was out. But Lord Vader, I had just come off of really long farms, and Lord Vader was really good and is still really good, but it just wasn't really in the cards for me from what I was doing, because it was just bad timing, right? It was good timing for me to get Profundity, but it was bad timing for me to get Jabba, even though I already have a lot of the requirements for Jabba completed. It was bad timing for me to get Jabba, but it was really good timing for me to get Leviathan. And now it's going to be really bad timing for me to get Galactic Legend Leia. But if it's Galactic Legend Mandalorian, I will do it just because I love Mandalorian and I want Grogu. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I love you. Subscribe to help me get 28,000 subscribers so that I can indeed love myself as much as I love you. Goodbye.